Well, welcome to another episode of Traveling Through History. Really glad you're here this evening. We're here to talk to you about the history of the magical country of Iceland, the land of fire and ice. And this is a country I was fortunate to visit last year with my family. We went in October of 2023. We actually did a podcast where we looked at all the photos and videos, and we talked about all of our incredible things that we did on that journey. And if you haven't looked at that podcast episode, please do. I'll go ahead and drop it in the comments down below. Please watch it. It was really worth a watch. My brother, myself, and my dad talked about our trip, the things that we got right, the things that maybe we would change next time we go to Iceland. If you're planning a trip yourself, definitely worth a watch. But tonight, instead of talking about the trip, we're going to talk about the actual history of Iceland, the first settlers, what they did to settle the really rough country, the resources that they found on the island, who they were, what tribes they were from in Europe. We'll talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to do a video, and we'll come back on the other side of the video and talk about the history of Iceland video. And then, as always in this program, we're going to talk about the 25 interesting facts about Iceland that we've put together in our research this week. So it's going to be really fun. This is a magical place to me and to my family. One of the greatest trips I've ever been on. The beauty of Iceland is indescribable. You have to actually see it yourself to believe it. And so I highly recommend, if it's still on your bucket list, to plan a trip. Make sure you build a really good itinerary and go have a great time. It is something you'll never see anywhere else other than maybe Switzerland and New Zealand, or the two other places like it. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into the history of Iceland and learn a little bit about the country. So the recorded history of Iceland began with the settlement by Viking explorers and people they enslaved from Western Europe, particularly in modern Norway and the British Isles in the late 9th century. Iceland was still uninhabited long after the rest of Western Europe had already been settled. Recorded settlement was conventionally been dated back to 874, although archaeological evidence indicates Gaelic monks from Ireland known as Papar, according to the Sagas, might have settled Iceland much earlier than that, maybe as early as 700 AD. The land was settled quickly, mainly by Norsemen, who may have been fleeing conflict or seeking new land to farm. By 930, just 60 years later, the chieftains had established a form of governance, which they called the Althing. And the Althing was the world's oldest parliament. Towards the end of the 10th century, Christianity came to Iceland through the influence of the Norwegian king, Olaf Tryggvason. During the time, Iceland remained independent, a period known as the Old Commonwealth. And Icelandic historians began to document the nation's history in books referred to as the Sagas of Icelanders. In the early 13th century, the internal conflict known as the Age of Sturlungs weakened Iceland, which eventually became subjugated to Norway over the 13th century. The Old Covenant, which happened 1262 to 1264, and the adoption of Jónsbók in 1281 effectively ended the Icelandic Commonwealth. Norway, in turn, was united with Sweden in 1319, and then with Denmark in 1376. Eventually, all the Nordic states were united in one alliance, the Kalmar Union. But on its dissolution, 200 years later, Iceland fell to Danish rule. So essentially, Norway ruled them for 200 years after the Commonwealth. And then after the dissolution of the alliance, Denmark took over Iceland. The subsequent strict Danish-Icelandic trade monopoly in the 17th and 18th centuries was detrimental to the economy of Europe. Iceland's resulting poverty was aggravated by severe natural disasters like the mist hardships. During this time, the population declined quite substantially. Iceland remained part of Denmark, but in keeping with the rise of nationalism around Europe in the 19th century, an independence movement emerged. The Althing, which had been suspended in 1799 and was the Congress that we talked about earlier, was restored in 1844, just 45 years later. Iceland gained sovereignty after World War I, becoming the Kingdom of Iceland on December 1st, 1918. However, Iceland shared the Danish monarchy until World War II. Although Iceland was neutral in the Second World War, The United Kingdom actually invaded the country and peacefully occupied it in 1940 to make sure the Nazis would not occupy it. After Denmark was overrun by the German Reich. Due to the island's strategic position in the North Atlantic, the Allies occupied the island until the end of the war, with the United States taking over occupation duties from the British in 1941. In 1944, Iceland severed its remaining ties with Denmark and declared itself an independent republic. Following the Second World War, Iceland was a founding member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, and joined the United Nations 1 year after its establishment. Its economy grew rapidly, largely through fishing, although this was marred by disputes with other nations. Vigd'is Finnbogad'ottir assumed Iceland's presidency on August 1st, 1980, became the third elected female head of state in the world and the first in Europe. Following rapid growth from 2008 to 2011, the Icelandic financial crisis occurred. Iceland continues to remain outside the European Union even today. Iceland is very remote, so it's been spared the ravages of European wars, but has been affected by other external events such as Black Death and Protestant Reformation imposed by Denmark. Iceland's history has also been marked by a number of natural disasters. It's actually a relatively young island in the geological sense, being formed about 20 million years ago by a series of volcanic eruptions in the mid-Atlantic range, which sits in between North America and Europe. It is actually still growing today from fresh volcano eruptions. The oldest stone specimens found in Iceland date back to 16 million years ago. So pretty interesting that the island is actually a young island compared to many others around the world, and being only 20 million years old. So Iceland remained for a long time one of the world's last uninhabited larger islands, alongside New Zealand and Madagascar. It's been suggested that the land called Thule by the Greek geographer Pytheas was Iceland, although it seems highly unlikely considering Pytheas' description of it as an agricultural country with plenty of milk, honey, and fruit. It's more likely he was referring to Norway or the Faroe Islands, potentially. Many of the early settlers were Þér, fleeing the recent union of Norway under Harald Fair and Telemark. A similar argument explains the name of Greenland from Grenland. Neighboring Telemark was also populated by Þér. The exact date that humans first reached the island is uncertain. Roman currency dating back to the 3rd century has been found in Iceland, but it's unknown whether they were brought there at that time or they came later with the Vikings in 800 or 900 after circulating for centuries. So many scientists have studied this, and they really believe that actually those Roman currency and Roman coins came much later with the Vikings in 870 when they came to settle. So I guess we'll never really know, but they did find some old Roman coins on the island as well. So in terms of the Landnámabók, which is a book that was put together as kind of like a survey of the entire island. It's one of the most important surveys that was done, and actually gives historians a place to refer to. Iceland was discovered at that time by Nadod, one of the first settlers of the Faroe Islands, who was sailing from Norway to the Faroes, but lost his way and drifted to the east coast of Iceland. Nadod called the country Snowland. And also at the same time, Swedish sailor Gunnar Sverrisson also accidentally drifted to the coast of Iceland. He discovered that the country was an island and called it Gunnar's Islet, and stayed the winter at Havasuk. The first Norseman who deliberately sailed to the island, though, was Hafra Vilgerson. He was actually known as Floki. Floki settled for one winter in Iceland. After the cold winter had passed, summer came and the whole island became green, which stunned Floki, realizing the place was in fact habitable. Despite horribly cold winter and full of useful resources, Floki restocked his boat and returned to Norway with resources and knowledge to tell people about this new island he had discovered. The first actual settlement or settler to Iceland is considered to have been Norwegian chieftain Igosfur Annarsson. and his wife, Halvig. According to Jónsbók, he threw 2 carved pillars overboard as he neared land, vowing to settle wherever the pillars landed. He then sailed along the coast until the pillars were found in the southwestern peninsula, now known as Reykjavik. There he settled his family around 874. Reykjavik, by the way, stands for Smoke Cove, probably from the geothermal steam that he saw rising from the earth all around the area. This place eventually became the capital and the largest city in modern Iceland. It is recognized, however, that Arnarsson may not have been the first one to settle permanently in Iceland. That may have been Natfari, one of Svavarsson's men who stayed behind when the Swede actually accidentally found Iceland. Svavardsson went to Scandinavia, but he left Natfari behind. Much of the information on Ilgafor comes from the Jónsbók, written from 3 centuries after the settlement, from archaeological findings in Reykjavik, and they're consistent with the date given. There was a settlement in Reykjavik around 870, so that really does square off with the 874 date that we believe Arnarsson was the settler for. The traditional explanation for the exodus from Norway is that people were fleeing the harsh rule of the Norwegian king Harald Fahlhair, who medieval literacy sources credit with the unification of some parts of modern Norway during this period. Viking incursions into Britain were also expelled thoroughly through this time, potentially leading to the need for peaceful settlement in other lands. It is also believed that the western fjords of Norway were simply overcrowded during this period. The settlement of Iceland is thoroughly recorded in the Jónsbók, as we talked about earlier, and was compiled in the early 12th century when at least 200 years had passed from the age of settlement. In 930, the ruling chiefs established an assembly called the Althing, as we mentioned earlier, and essentially the Althing was the first parliament in a democratic body that had been ever formed in Europe. And this body in Iceland was actually formed in a park that's very special, and we actually went there. And they would stand on the rocks and talk about laws and pass laws and vote all while standing. So it was essentially a standing legislature. It's really fascinating. We'll talk some more about that when we get into the actual video itself. Iceland enjoyed a mostly uninterrupted period of growth in its Commonwealth years. Settlements from that area have been found in southwest Greenland and eastern Canada, and in sagas such as the Saga of Eric the Red and his Greenland saga speak of the settlers' exploits after settlement. The settlers of Iceland were predominantly pagans and worshipped the Norse gods, among them Odin and Thor and Fjær and Freyja. By the 10th century, political pressure from Europe to convert to Christianity mounted. As the end of the first millennium grew near, many prominent Icelanders had accepted the new faith. Around 961, a volcano in southern Iceland erupted, 7 square miles of lava, and lifted up huge clouds of sulfuric gas that affected all of northern Europe and spanned out as far as northern China. It also created rare hazes and multiple food crises in different parts of the world, including that year and many years that followed. And obviously, many people were impacted all over Iceland, and they lost a lot of population. Early Iceland settlers who were Norse followed paganism. However, after the volcano eruption, many thought of it as an act from God and started to convert to Christianity instead. It also believed that they converted to Christianity to maintain peace with their European neighbors and the Catholic Church. In the year 1000, as a civil war between the religious groups seemed likely, the Althing appointed one of its chieftains to decide the issue of religion by arbitration. He decided that the country should convert to Christianity as a whole, but the pagans would be allowed to worship privately. The first Icelandic bishop was consecrated by Bishop Hamburg in 1056. So you can see the Christian conversion, they found a way to do it in a very peaceful way, which was unusual back then. And they were also allowing the pagans to continue to do their faith. So it was really an open society, allowing anybody to worship the way that they wanted to. During the 11th and 12th centuries, the centralization of power had worn down the institutions of the Commonwealth, as the former notable independence of local farmers and chieftains gave way to the growing power of a handful of families and their leaders. From 1200 to 1262 is known as the Age of Sturlungs, and this is essentially a civil war era where all the clans were at each other's throats. This opened the door for Norway, who came in with their king and rulers to take over Iceland and impose a Norwegian way of life and allegiance to the king. Commonwealth era was over. Under Norwegian rule, little had changed for hundreds of years. Essentially, the consolidation of power had been slow, but it had been consistent. The country remained Christian, and it was relatively stable during these years, and many different innovations came in. They found ways to grow all kinds of different new crops, including barley and cereal and livestock, and the country was really flourishing. They also started to become great fishermen, and the codfish industry took flight at that time. In the 18th century, climatic conditions in Iceland reached an all-time low since the original settlement. Laki erupted in 1783, Laki being a very large volcano, spitting out 12.5 cubic kiloliters of lava. Floods, ash, and fumes killed 9,000 people and 80,000 livestock. The ensuing starvation killed a quarter of the island's population. This period is known as the Mist Hardships. So really, they went through a lot of hardship there through some of these decades and millennia, as you can see. Throughout the 19th century, the country's climate continued to grow worse, resulting in mass immigration to the New World, especially Manitoba and Canada. However, a new national consciousness was revived in Iceland, inspired by nationalist ideas from continental Europe. The revival was spearheaded by a group of Danish-educated Icelandic individuals. An independence movement developed under the leadership of a lawyer named Jón Tryggvason. In 1843, a new Althing was founded as a consultative assembly. It claimed continuity with the Althing of Icelandic Commonwealth back in the 900s and 1000s, which had remained for centuries as a judicial body and had been abolished in the 1800s by Norway. After World War I, the country prospered and became its own kingdom. And then, as we mentioned earlier, after World War II, it really became a real country and joined NATO and the United Nations. Through all these wars, however, Iceland remained a base for the Allies to operate out of, but was still neutral in the war itself. So that's a little bit about the history of Iceland. You can see the Viking settlers went through a lot of hardships, but they really established a great society that was democratic and relatively peaceful. And then, of course, they got conquered again by Norway and had many centuries they had to deal with Norwegian rule, coming all the way up to the modern day where they were neutral in the world wars, but eventually got their freedom and their independence and became a real country and were able to join the League of Countries around the world. So that's a little bit about Iceland. Let's go ahead and take a look at the video and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Imagine a remote, uncharted island in the North Atlantic, shrouded in mystery and untouched by human hands. This mystical land of fire and ice boasts a history as captivating as its dramatic landscapes. It wasn't until the late 9th century AD that daring explorers, driven by curiosity and the promise of new horizons, set foot on its volcanic shores. These fearless settlers laid the foundations of a unique and fiercely resilient society, marked by epic sagas, enduring traditions, and a remarkable journey from an isolated colony to a modern nation. Dive into a profound history, where each chapter is filled with tales of exploration, survival, and extraordinary transformation. Here are 15 fascinating facts about the history of Iceland. Fact number 1. In the late 9th century, Norse chieftain Ingólfur Arnarson led the first settlers to Iceland's shores. Iceland was among the last major islands in the world to be settled by humans. The first permanent settlers arrived in the late 9th century, led by Norse chieftain Ingólfur Arnarson. According to tradition, Ingólfur threw his high seat pillars into the sea upon sighting Iceland, pledging to settle wherever they washed ashore. This led him to the area of present-day Reykjavik, where he established the first permanent settlement around 874 AD. Early settlers faced harsh conditions, but were drawn by the island's abundant resources and potential for farming and fishing. These settlers were primarily from Norway, but many also came from other Scandinavian regions and the British Isles. They brought with them their language, culture, and traditions, which laid the foundation for Icelandic society. The settlers organized themselves into a chieftain-led system, forming the early political and social structures that would shape Iceland's development over the centuries. Fact number 2. The Icelandic Althing is the world's oldest parliament, showcasing Iceland's deep democratic roots. The Icelandic Althing, established in 930 AD, is the world's oldest surviving parliamentary institution. It was founded at Þingvellir, a natural assembly site where chieftains and their followers gathered annually to discuss laws, settle disputes, and make important decisions. The Althing was a combination of legislative and judicial authority, demonstrating an advanced level of self-governance for its time. This assembly provided a forum for chieftains to maintain peace and order in a decentralized society. The Althing met at Þingvellir until 1798, after which it was temporarily discontinued due to Danish influence. Despite this interruption, the tradition of the Althing persisted, and it was revived in Reykjavik in 1845. Today, the Althing stands as a symbol of Icelandic democracy and independence, having evolved into a modern parliamentary system while maintaining its historical roots. Fact number 3. Icelandic Vikings, including Leif Ericson, reached North America around 1000 AD, long before Columbus. According to the Vinland Sagas, Icelandic Vikings were among the first Europeans to land in North America around the year 1000 AD. Leif Ericson, son of the famous Viking Eric the Red, is credited with leading an expedition that discovered Vinland, believed to be part of modern-day Newfoundland. This discovery predates Christopher Columbus's voyage by nearly 500 years. The sagas describe Vinland as a land of abundant resources, including grapes and timber, which were scarce in Iceland. While the Viking settlement in North America was short-lived, these voyages demonstrated the exceptional seafaring skills of the Norse explorers. The tales of Vinland became an integral part of Icelandic and Norse folklore, illustrating the adventurous spirit and far-reaching impact of the Viking Age. This period marked a significant chapter in Icelandic history, highlighting the exploration and expansion of the Norse people beyond Europe. While the Viking settlement in North America was short-lived, these voyages demonstrated the exceptional seafaring skills of the Norse explorers. The tales of Vinland became an integral part of Icelandic and Norse folklore, illustrating the adventurous spirit and far-reaching impact of the Viking Age. Fact number 4. In 1000 AD, Iceland adopted Christianity with a unique condition to ensure peace and harmony. In the year 1000 AD, Iceland officially adopted Christianity through a unique and peaceful process at the Althing, the nation's legislative assembly. Faced with potential civil conflict between the pagan and Christian factions, the law speaker, Thorgeir Ljósvetningagoði, proposed a pragmatic solution. He suggested that Iceland convert to Christianity while allowing private pagan worship to continue. This compromise was accepted by the assembly, ensuring a smooth transition to the new faith. The decision to adopt Christianity without bloodshed was a significant milestone in Icelandic history. It demonstrated the country's capacity for negotiation and tolerance, setting a precedent for religious harmony. This event not only unified the nation under a single religion, but also strengthened Iceland's cultural and political ties with the rest of Christian Europe. The peaceful conversion remains a notable example of conflict resolution and pragmatic leadership in Iceland's history. Fact number 5. The 13th century Icelandic sagas recount epic tales of Norse heroism, adventure, and daily life. The Icelandic sagas written in the 13th century are epic narratives that provide a detailed history of Iceland's early settlers and their descendants. These sagas blend myth, history, and legend, offering unique insights into the lives, struggles, and values of the Norse people. Written in Old Norse, they include family sagas, kings' sagas, and legendary sagas, each contributing to the rich tapestry of Icelandic literary heritage. They cover a wide range of themes, from heroism and vengeance to love and law, The sagas are considered some of the finest examples of medieval European literature. They have been studied extensively for their historical content and literary artistry. These works not only preserve the memory of Iceland's early history, but also reflect the societal norms and legal principles of the time. The sagas continue to be a source of national pride and cultural identity for Icelanders. Fact number 6. The 1783 Laki eruption caused widespread famine and the death of a quarter of Iceland's population. The eruption of the Laki volcano between 1783 to 1784 was one of the most catastrophic events in Icelandic history. The eruption lasted for 8 months, releasing massive amounts of lava and toxic gases into the atmosphere. The resulting ash cloud led to a volcanic winter, causing widespread crop failures and severe famine. Approximately a quarter of Iceland's population perished due to the ensuing starvation and related diseases. The Laki eruption also had far-reaching effects, impacting climate and agriculture across Europe and beyond. This disaster highlighted the volatile nature of Iceland's geological landscape. The country, situated on the mid-Atlantic ridge, experiences frequent volcanic activity and earthquakes. Despite the devastation, Icelanders demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. The Laki eruption, while tragic, underscored the importance of understanding and preparing for natural disasters in a land shaped by powerful geological forces. Fact number 7. From 1814, Iceland was under Danish rule, experiencing periods of alliance and conflict. Iceland became part of the Kingdom of Denmark-Norway in 1814 following the Treaty of Kiel, which ended Danish-Norwegian union. This transition marked the beginning of over a century of Danish influence over Iceland. Under Danish rule, Iceland retained a degree of autonomy, but was largely governed by Danish officials. The relationship was complex, with periods of cooperation and tension. Danish rule brought certain administrative and infrastructural changes, but Icelandic culture and language remained resiliently independent. Despite being under Danish rule, Iceland maintained its distinct identity. The 19th century saw a burgeoning national consciousness, with Icelanders increasingly advocating for greater self-determination. This period laid the groundwork for the eventual movement toward independence. Key figures in Icelandic history, such as Jón Sigurðsson, emerged during this time, championing the cause of Icelandic independence and contributing to the development of a national identity distinct from Denmark. Fact number 8. In 1904, Iceland gained home rule from Denmark, setting the stage for modern self-governance. In 1904, Iceland was granted home rule by Denmark, marking a significant step toward full independence. This change allowed Iceland to self-govern while remaining under Danish sovereignty. The appointment of Hannes Hafstein as the first minister for Iceland signaled a new era of autonomy. This period saw the establishment of local institutions and infrastructure, laying the groundwork for a modern Icelandic state. Home rule brought about significant political and economic reforms, fostering a sense of national pride and identity. The move towards greater self-governance was driven by Icelandic nationalists who had long advocated for more autonomy. This period of home rule was characterized by increased political activity and the formation of various political parties. It also saw improvements in education, transportation, and communication, contributing to Iceland's development. Fact number 9. During the 20th century, Iceland experienced a period when alcoholic beverages were outlawed. From 1915 to 1935, Iceland experienced a period of prohibition, banning all alcoholic beverages. Initially, the ban included all forms of alcohol, reflecting the country's temperance movement's influence. However, economic pressures led to a partial lift in 1922, allowing the importation of Spanish and Portuguese wines to maintain trade relations. Despite this relaxation, beer with an alcohol content of more than 2.25% remained prohibited. In 1935, the prohibition on spirits was lifted, but the beer ban persisted until 1989, making it one of the longest beer prohibitions in history. The prolonged prohibition era highlights Iceland's unique approach to alcohol regulation and its impact on social and economic policies. Today, the lifting of the beer ban on March 1, 1989, is celebrated annually as Beer Day, reflecting the significant cultural shift and the end of an unusual chapter in Icelandic history. Fact number 10. Iceland formally declared itself a republic in 1944, finally achieving full independence. Iceland declared itself a republic on June 17, 1944, during World War II, while Denmark was still occupied by Nazi Germany. This historic event took place at Þingvellir, the traditional site of the Althing, symbolizing the continuity of Iceland's democratic traditions. The move to independence was overwhelmingly supported by a national referendum. Sveinn Björnsson, who had served as regent during the transitional period, became the country's first president. Independence marked the culmination of a long struggle for self-determination. Iceland's strategic location in the North Atlantic made it a significant player during the war, particularly for the Allies. The declaration of the Republic was a defining moment, allowing Iceland to fully control its domestic and foreign affairs. Since then, Iceland has developed into a modern, prosperous nation with a strong emphasis on democracy and human rights. Fact number 11. Between the 1950s and 1970s, Iceland fiercely defended its fishing rights against the UK. Iceland engaged in a series of confrontations with the United Kingdom known as the Cod Wars over fishing rights in the North Atlantic. These disputes arose from Iceland's extension of its fishing limits from 4 to 12 nautical miles in 1958, then to 50 miles in 1972, and finally to 200 miles in 1975. The Cod Wars were marked by aggressive encounters between Icelandic patrol boats and British trawlers, with both sides deploying naval vessels to protect their interests. The Cod Wars were driven by Iceland's reliance on fishing as a cornerstone of its economy. Securing exclusive fishing rights was crucial for the nation's economic survival and growth. Despite the tensions, the Cod Wars ended without any fatalities. Iceland's eventual success in expanding its fishing limits had a profound impact, setting a precedent for the establishment of exclusive economic zones under international law, significantly influencing maritime policy worldwide. Fact number 12. Since 1969, Iceland has been a leader in geothermal energy, utilizing its volcanic landscape. Iceland pioneered the use of geothermal energy, with the first geothermal power plant opening in 1969, making it a leader in renewable energy today. Iceland's unique geological features, including abundant volcanic activity and geothermal springs, provide an excellent source of sustainable energy. The development of geothermal energy has significantly reduced Iceland's reliance on fossil fuels, contributing to the country's goal of achieving energy independence and sustainability. The utilization of geothermal energy has had far-reaching benefits for Iceland. It powers nearly all of the country's electricity and heating needs, supporting both residential and industrial applications. Iceland's expertise in geothermal technology has also become an export commodity, with Icelandic companies and experts assisting other countries in developing their geothermal resources. This pioneering spirit in renewable energy reflects Iceland's commitment to environmental stewardship and innovation. Fact number 13. In 1980, Iceland elected Vigd'is Finnbogad'ottir, the world's first female president. In 1980, Iceland made history by electing Vigd'is Finnbogad'ottir as the world's first democratically elected female president. Her presidency, which lasted 4 terms until 1996, was marked by a strong emphasis on promoting Icelandic culture and education. Vigd'is was a passionate advocate for the arts and the preservation of Iceland's linguistic heritage. Her leadership significantly boosted Iceland's cultural profile internationally. Vigd'is's tenure was notable for her efforts to support and enhance the educational system in Iceland. She played a pivotal role in fostering cultural ties between Iceland and other nations. Even after her presidency, Vigd'is remained a prominent figure, continuing to champion cultural and educational causes. Her legacy includes the Vigd'is International Center for Multilingualism and Intercultural Understanding, which promotes linguistic and cultural diversity worldwide. Fact number 14. The 2008 financial crisis devastated Iceland, but its recovery showcased national resilience. In 2008, Iceland suffered a severe economic crisis, with the collapse of its three major banks, Glitnir, Landsbanki, and Kaupthing. This financial meltdown was one of the most dramatic in history, leading to a sharp contraction in the economy and significant social upheaval. The crisis was precipitated by excessive borrowing and risky investments, exposing the vulnerabilities of the financial system. The Icelandic krona plummeted, and many citizens lost their savings and jobs. In response to the crisis, Iceland implemented comprehensive financial restructuring and reforms. The government took unprecedented steps, including the nationalization of banks and strict capital controls. Despite the initial hardships, these measures helped stabilize the economy. Iceland's recovery was aided by a resilient tourism sector and strong natural resource industries. Fact number 15. The Icelandic language has remained virtually unchanged since the Viking Age. Icelandic has changed very little since the Viking Age, and modern Icelanders can still read classic texts from over 1,000 years ago with ease. This remarkable linguistic continuity is a testament to Iceland's dedication to preserving its language and cultural heritage. Efforts to maintain the purity of the Icelandic language have been rigorous, with the creation of new Icelandic words for modern concepts rather than borrowing from other languages. The preservation of Icelandic is supported by institutions like the Árni Magnússon Institute for Icelandic Studies, which plays a crucial role in linguistic research and education. Icelandic literature, from the medieval sagas to contemporary works, continues to be a vibrant part of the nation's cultural identity. The language is a source of national pride, connecting Icelanders to their rich history and ensuring that the voices of the past remain accessible to future generations.
So as you can see from that video, there's many things we need to discuss. The first one is Arnarsson and his people who came to settle in 874 came to a very harsh land that they didn't really have a lot of resources with them. They essentially had everything they could take off of the boat, but they established a wonderful society that led very soon to the first democracy in Europe. They learned to farm and they learned to use the resources that were abundant in Iceland. They established what essentially is today Reykjavik and the capital city. And they established the foundation for this country that would become the modern country it is today. So that was the first bit there in the video. The second bit would be the legislature itself that came along, and that's the Althing. And as you saw, they showed you some videos and pictures there of where the Althing was held, which is out in a stone park area, a beautiful area that we went to on our trip last year, called Thingvellir Park, which is an incredible place. And it's actually a place where you can go and you can, in several spots, stand with one leg in Europe and one leg in North America, because it's right there on the continental divide. So it's really a historic and amazing place. And very cool to see many years later, when they got their independence in 1944, they went and had the ceremony at the same spot that the Althing was originally assembled back in 930 AD. And all the way up through the 1700s. So a very cool history there. Next thing I wanted to mention was Leif Ericson, who was an Icelander, and his father, Eric the Red, who went and discovered Greenland. But in terms of Leif Ericson himself, he and his men were the first ones to discover Eastern Canada, which they called Vinland. And they stayed there for some time and then ended up sailing back to Iceland and writing all about it. In all the Icelandic literature for centuries, they talked about Vinland as this magical place that they had discovered, and this place full of resources that they wanted to go back to one day. And so Vinland became this incredible location that they often talked about and that they had discovered, as you heard, 500 years earlier than Christopher Columbus. It's really a pretty amazing thing there. Another thing I wanted to mention was, as you saw, Vigd'is, the first female president in European history, was elected in Iceland in 1980 and had a huge impact. Served four-year terms, so 16 years total, and was able to establish relations between Iceland and almost every major country in the world. Really had a huge impact on the modern politics of Iceland. And then another bit of that video that was very interesting, and we actually witnessed this on our trip quite a bit, and that is how much Iceland has been able to use renewable energy to power their cities and power their entire regions around the country. They've been essentially able to tap into the geothermal energy that's coming from almost every area of the island. And you'll see these little plants all over the island that are generating this geothermal energy into electricity. And so it's really cool. They have about 85 to 90% of their energy now is geothermal and renewables. And it allows them to use very little carbon footprint and very little carbon energy, and use most of it as renewables. So it's pretty cool to see that. So as you can see, they have a very diverse and rich history that we've gone through with you, both in my first talk and then also in the video. And you can study Icelandic history and learn so much about all the different centuries that they've been through and all the different eras as they've developed into this new modern flourishing democracy. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 25 interesting facts that I was able to put together out of my research. Number one, Iceland's parliament is the oldest in Europe, as we mentioned, and that's the Althing, which is their parliament that was established in 930 AD, and is considered to be the first parliamentary institution in Europe. It was originally located in Thingvellir Park, and you saw some pictures of the video that actually showed it, and you see some pictures there on the bottom of the slide. On the left side there is the standing legislature, where they're all standing on the rock. They're talking about the laws that they're talking about that particular year, that the artist is showing the rendering there, and they're making their laws by doing votes. And on the right side is what Thingvellir Park looks like today, and you can actually walk all the way out to the spot where the legislature used to meet for all those centuries. The Thingvellir, which is anglicized to mean fields of a thing, which is a nod to the area's fascinating history and relevance to Icelandic culture. It may seem unlikely Vikings would want to be under such an uncombative government, but the 30 or so clans that lived in Iceland at the time sought to prosper in their harsh new environment. The first gathering was such a success that the meetings became annual, and it became a place where disputes were settled, criminals were tried, laws to the benefit of all were laid down and voted on. This saw the birth of Icelandic Commonwealth, a time of independence and freedom of the Icelandic people before they became constituents of the Norwegian monarchy. Sessions would continue to be held until 1798. So for a full 800 years or so, this legislative body was in place. And as you saw, some years later, it was actually brought back in the 1800s in a different form, of course. Number two, Iceland has only one native land mammal and a national bird. The Arctic fox, you see there on the bottom left, is the only land animal that is actually native to Iceland. It was not brought there from another place, having colonized the island naturally under the last ice age. It is commonly seen in the Þorstendir Nature Reserve in the West Fjords. And you see a picture of the kind of place that you would find this fox, the beautiful landscape of Iceland in the West Fjords. The largest puffin colony in the world is located in the Westman Islands of Iceland. This colony is home to millions of puffins during the breeding season and can be seen on tours of the Westman Islands. The puffin is the national bird of Iceland, and you can see there on the right several pictures of what the puffin looks like with its orange beak and its black body. And we actually were fortunate in our trip to Iceland to see several puffins. While we were there, we saw them flying around the cave areas, and it was really cool to see them. And there are a lot of people that actually go to Iceland just to hunt down these beautiful birds. Number three, what makes the Northern Lights? Northern Lights are an atmospheric phenomenon that's regarded as the holy grail of sky watching. The aurora borealis typically occurs only at 35 degrees or lower. So cold times of year are when you actually want to go see it. So they actually recommend to go to Iceland in October, November, December if you really want to see the Northern Lights. The Northern Lights are beautiful dancing ribbons of light that have captivated people for millennia. Usually the lights in the sky are green, but sometimes they appear red. For all its beauty, this spectacular light show is a rather violent event. The Northern Lights were created when energized particles from the sun slam into Earth's upper atmosphere at speeds of up to 45 million miles per hour. But our planet's magnetic field protects us from the onslaught. As Earth's magnetic field redirects the particles towards the poles, there are southern lights as well. So now you can see southern lights in New Zealand, Australia, Argentina, and Antarctica, and of course northern lights in places like Iceland and Norway and northern countries. And so these particles, as they get redirected towards the poles, gives it the ribbon of lights that you see there in the northern lights. I actually want to go see the southern lights as well now. Number 4, the first European to reach North America was Icelandic, and we've mentioned Leif Ericson and his exploration of Vinland. It's believed that he, around 1000 AD, was the preceding explorer to Christopher Columbus. He established a settlement called Vinland in modern-day Newfoundland, Canada. After spending the winter in Vinland, Ericson and his crew sailed home to windswept Greenland with badly needed timber and plentiful portions of grapes. Ericson, who would succeed Eric the Red as chief of Greenland settlement after his father's death, never returned to North America, but other Vikings continued to sail west of Vinland for at least the ensuing decade. So you can see some pictures there of Leif Erikson and his men and a front version of his ship. And you see his wife is there with him in their first trip to Vinland, their first exploration of North America. Number 5, there are no mosquitoes or polar bears in Iceland. A lot of people find that a really surprising fact. There are no mosquitoes in Iceland due to its cold climate and lack of suitable breeding habitats for these insects. This makes hiking Iceland one of the favorite places for adventurers from around the world. Also, contrary to popular belief, there are no polar bears in Iceland. They do occasionally show up, however, after drifting on icebergs from Greenland to Iceland accidentally. But there's no colony of bears that's ever started over the centuries. It's pretty interesting. No mosquitoes and no polar bears in Iceland. Number 6, the largest glacier in Europe is in Iceland. That's the Vatnajökull Glacier, which you can see pictures of there on the bottom left and in the center. It's a humongous area of Iceland, southern Iceland, that is this amazing glacier. It covers an area of approximately 3,100 square miles. Approximately 11% of Iceland is covered by glaciers, which is second in the world after Antarctica. And so, you can see why they call it the land of fire and ice, with all the volcanic activity in some areas and all the ice activity in other areas. And why you can see the settlers, when they came and landed, called it Iceland, because they saw all these glaciers everywhere. Number 7, sheep roam free in Iceland in the summer and outnumber humans. Icelandic sheep are traditionally allowed to roam free in the summer months, grazing on open pastures and mountainous terrain. In the fall, they're gathered by their farmers during the Rikic, or the roundup, and brought back to lower pastures for the winter. Icelandic sheep produce 2 types of wool: the tog, which is long outer coat with coarse fibers, and the pell, which is a softer, shorter inner coat. This unique wool composition makes Icelandic wool ideal for a wide range of textiles and garments. And as you can see here, sheep outnumber humans in Iceland by 4 to 1. So that means if there's 400,000 Icelanders, that means there's about 1.6 million sheep. Number 8, Iceland has its own breed of horses. The Icelandic horse is unique for its sturdy build, thick mane and tail with distinct 5th gait called a tolt. So it actually has a different gait, or a different little jog, than it does other horses from around the world. Bred in isolation for over a millennium, it's known for its strength, endurance, and gentle temperament. Once an Icelandic horse leaves Iceland, however, it is not allowed to return. This measure is in place to preserve the breed's purity and to prevent the introduction of any diseases. So essentially, if you take an Icelandic horse and load it on a ship, take it away, it's never coming back. Some beautiful pictures there of these horses, and you see them all over the countryside. They really are very unique looking. Number 9, you can walk or swim between tectonic plates in Iceland. What we did there in Thingvellir Park that we showed earlier is we actually were walking in between and standing in between these different areas where you can go between the North America side and the Europe side of these tectonic plates. But there's actually some places you can swim as well. And you see a picture there on the right of somebody who's swimming from one side of the tectonic plate to the other. You can have your go at crossing the bridge between continents, which you see there on the left, or you can make your snorkeling tour between continents in the Silfra Fissure, which is that picture on the right. Number 10, Iceland is the safest country in the world. According to the Global Peace Index, Iceland is the safest country in the world for the 14th year in a row in 2024. Police officers in Iceland typically don't even carry firearms while on duty, but firearms are instead stored in locked compartments in patrol vehicles and are only issued in situations where there is a specific threat or need for armed response. Iceland's crime rate is the lowest in the world by a factor of 2. And you can see on the left side there are the 10 countries with the highest crime rates. Starts with Venezuela, South Africa is in there, Afghanistan, and Brazil. And then on the right side are the most peaceful or lowest crime areas of the world. And it starts with Iceland and is followed by New Zealand and Portugal. It's really interesting. Iceland is by far the safest place on earth. Number 11, the word geyser is from Icelandic. And you see a couple great pictures of geysers there. And we had so much fun on our trip going to see some of these geysers. And we actually got quite a few of them on video. And definitely a great experience if you get to go. The English language is quite hodgepodge of international tongues and dialects, with words derived from Irish and Gaelic, French, German, Latin, and even Norwegian and Icelandic. The word geyser comes from the Old Norse when it was spelled geisa and means to rush or to gush forth. Iceland is famous for its geysers. As far back as the 13th century, there are documented findings of this geological feature. This dramatic and sometimes dangerous phenomenon has captivated explorers, artists, and scientists for centuries. And of course, now it fascinates the tourists that come there. Number 12, Beer Day on March 1st celebrates the end of long beer ban. You saw this in the video. They talked about how that beer ban was in place for a long, long time. It was about 75 years. Like the United States, Iceland had an unsuccessful spell of prohibition. Unlike the United States, Iceland commemorates the end of prohibition with a national beer-themed celebration. Back in 1908, Iceland voted on an alcohol ban. That ban was amended when it affected their import-export businesses, as countries like Spain wanted to import wine to Iceland. So a ban on beer was born. It lasted until 1989. Now beer is the most popular alcoholic beverage in Iceland. Beer Day, taking place on March 1st, is an unofficial national holiday marking the occasion. If you're in Reykjavik, you might see some local and visiting revelers engaged in a pub crawl and imbibing a beer or two. Beer was banned for over 74 years, so they're making up for lost time. And you can see some of the incredible beers that they produce there. We tried several of them, and they were really fantastic. The Viking beer in particular was really great. So if you get a chance to go to Iceland, definitely try it. Number 13, a small part of Iceland is in the Arctic Circle. The northernmost point of Iceland, which is called the Grimsey Island, lies just above the Arctic Circle, making it into the only part of Iceland that crosses into the Arctic Circle. Around 983 AD, Eric the Red, Leif Ericson's father, finally reached southern Greenland, now known as Tunnu-Lifurik, Greenland. He spent the next 2 years exploring the western and northern regions of the island he called the Greenland. Greenland is located further east, west, north, and south than Iceland. So you can see Greenland is so much larger than Iceland that it actually is all four, east, west, north, and south of Iceland. Pretty cool. Number 14, the Icelandic language has its own unique letters, and you can see what their alphabet looks like up top. Very, very different from English. This is the closest language to the old Viking language. The Icelandic alphabet includes some unique letters not found in the English alphabet. These include, and you can see them there, what is essentially looks like a P, but it sounds like a TH, a D, an AE that sounds like an E, and an O with 2 dots over it that sounds like an U. The Icelandic language has changed little in the past 1,000 years. Icelandic has retained many features of the Old Norse language. The language spoken by Norse settlers who arrived in Iceland in the 9th and 10th centuries. As a result, modern Icelandic is still largely intelligible to speakers of Old Norse and has preserved much of the grammatical structure, vocabulary, and pronunciation over the centuries. Icelandic is the closest to what the old Vikings would speak in the Middle Ages than any other language on earth. So again, you can see that incredible alphabet that they have there and all the different types of ways that they do their letters. And then a really fantastic picture there on the top left of what an ice cave looks like in Iceland. We actually were fortunate to visit an ice cave, and it was an incredible experience. Number 15, Iceland is a popular filming location. Iceland is a popular location for film and television productions due to its unique and diverse landscapes, which can double for a wide range of settings. From otherworldly alien planets to rugged wilderness, water, ice locations are also plentiful. And of course, we have the fire locations with all the volcanoes. Examples of some of the films that were shot in Iceland: A View to a Kill in 1985, Lara Croft Tomb Raider 2001, Die Another Day 2002, Batman Begins 2005, Flag of Our Fathers 2006, Journey to the Center of the Earth 2008, Interstellar 2014, Prometheus 2012, Thor: The Dark World 2013, Star Wars: The Force Awakens 2015, Rogue One: A Star Wars Story in 2016, and Fast and Furious 8 in 2017. And you can see a picture there on the top. That's called the Yoda Cave, and it's a cave that was used in both of these Star Wars movies for several Yoda scenes. So it's really cool. They call it the Yoda Cave. You can actually get into it now. And then on the right there was the movie Interstellar. You can see the topography in Iceland. There's areas of it with the lava fields that have hardened over the centuries. It really does look like the moon. There's no trees at all, and it looks like you're literally on the moon. And then there's a great picture there of Aquaman, of course. What a great movie that was. And you can see this topography is perfect for that type of movie as well. Number 16, the largest battle in Iceland took place in 1238 AD. The largest battle ever fought in Iceland is known as the Battle of Olaf, which took place in 1238 between roughly 2,700 men. The battle was fought on August 21st, 1238, between Sighvatur Sturluson and his son Sturla Sigvason on one side, and Kolbein Ungi and Gissur Pulvertsson on the other. The areas controlled by the Sturlungar were more populous, but the settlements were more scattered, which made it difficult for the Sturlungar to assemble fighting men. Both clans emerged victorious after a short battle. Over 50 men were killed on that day, including Sighvatur and Sturla, so he and his son both died in this battle. According to the Saga of Icelanders, Gissur only lost 7 men, whereas Kolbein lost none of his men. So pretty incredible. This was the largest battle in their history. About 50 men total were killed that day. Number 17, there are over 130 volcanoes in Iceland. I mentioned this in the lead up to the program about how many active volcanoes there are all over this island. Iceland's home to over 130 volcanic mountains, some of which are considered among the most active in the world. In the last 4 years, the Reykjanes Peninsula has had 7 volcanic eruptions alone, just in the last 4 years. It runs along the Mid-Atlantic Rift, where the Eurasian and North American tectonic plates are drifting apart. Due to this geological setting, the whole peninsula is extremely volcanically active, covered with moss-coated lava fields and cone-shaped mountains. There is lava flowing somewhere in Iceland 365 days a year, and volcano tourism has sprung up. And when I say volcano tourism, there are literally people that go to Iceland on a regular basis and go and chase these volcanoes and chase the molten lava. And they go out in their SUVs and they go hike up to these spots to go get close to these eruptions. And you can see some of the incredible pictures of the molten lava just recently. These are active volcanoes that are happening right now. You can see they run over roads and streets. They run out into the countryside. They are just devastating to everything around them. And it's really an incredible sight. Number 18, there are very few forests in Iceland. Iceland's forests were cut down and converted to pastures by Iceland's first settlers, who used the wood for fuel and ships and houses. The Vikings and other early settlers also cleared forests to make room for sheep grazing and their vast livestock. Today, forests cover only 2% of Iceland's surface, making it the least forested country in Europe. However, Icelandic government has been reforesting the country since the 1950s and has made forestation a priority in its climate action plan. Since 2015, Iceland has planted between 3 and 4 million trees. The government's goal is to increase the amount of native woodland to 5% over the next 50 years. And you can see on the left side is what desolate Iceland looks like in 98% of the areas of the country. And on the right side, you can see some areas where the government has started to plant millions of trees to start reforesting the island. So this is a really great thing that they're doing, and it's going to, as you see, take them many decades to be able to catch up. But this is something they're really making an action on. Number 19, you can enter glacial ice caves in Iceland. And I mentioned this earlier, and we were fortunate to do so. And it was actually probably the most fun experience we had on the entire trip, was going ice caving. There's several ice caves that form naturally within Iceland that can be visited on guided tours, such as the Katla Ice Cave Tour, which explores stunning formations inside a glacier. Ice caving has become one of the most popular things to do for tourists in their visits to Iceland, and create some of the most stunning underground photos. And I gave you 4 different views there of what an ice cave looks like underground, and it is just stunning, with the light coming through and providing those incredible blue landscapes underground. It's really, I highly recommend it if you get a chance to do it. It's a lot of fun. 20, Iceland had the world's first democratically elected female president. You saw this in the video, a lot about Vigd'is and her impact on the country and her 16-year rule as democratically elected president. That happened in 1980. She served as president for 4 consecutive terms until 1996, became an icon in Icelandic history. Vigd'is ran for president to prove that women were able to lead political campaigns, but she did not actually expect to win. Despite this, Vigd'is won the election on June 29, 1980. The vote was split between 4 candidates, and she prevailed with 33.6% of the vote. And you can see she had kind of a particular style back then, very similar to like a Margaret Thatcher. She would wear pantsuits, and she would wear these really classy hats, and became kind of very well known across the democratic world. 21, the Yule lads are Iceland's version of Santa Claus. Mischievous brothers who visit children in the 13 days leading up to Christmas. Each has a distinct personality and brings either gifts or pranks, reflecting Icelandic Christmas traditions and customs. And you can see the 13 Yule lads there on the bottom, each of them coming on a different day, starting on December 12th, leading all the way up to December 25th. And as we said, each of them either brings you a gift or some type of prank. And we have listed there on the bottom left what all the different pranks are that they do to you if they don't bring you a gift. So that first one there, they harass sheep. The next one is they hide in gullies. Another one, they steal pans out of your kitchen. So they do a lot of fun things. But apparently this, in Icelandic culture and for Icelandic kids, is a lot of fun. These Yule lads give them that unique experience leading up to Christmas Day. Number 22, the entry to the center of the earth is in Iceland. Jules Verne wrote about Snæfellsjökull, which is a glacier-capped volcano located on the peninsula, in his novel Journey to the Center of the Earth, which is a very famous book, as most of you have probably read. Verne depicted the glacier as the entrance to the passage leading to the center of the earth. The movie of the same title was also filmed in this region of Iceland. And you can see a picture of this incredible mountain that is depicted in Jules Verne's book on the left there, way in the back with the snow-capped mountain. In the middle is the book by Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and what he envisioned that mountain to be, which was the entry point to the center of the earth. And then there's a picture there on the right with Brendan Fraser, who's the actor who played in Journey to the Center of the Earth, a movie that came out recently. And they actually filmed most of it in Iceland. Number 23, Iceland's energy is 90% green and renewables, and we talked about this a little bit coming out of the video. It's known for having one of the highest percentages of renewable energy use in the world. country relies primarily on renewable energy sources such as geothermal and hydroelectric power for its electricity production and heating needs. Approximately 90% of Iceland's total energy consumption comes from those renewable sources. And I put a couple great pictures here that shows you what their entire countryside looks like. If you just drive around, you'll see them everywhere. These little plants and cracks in the rock and crevices and geothermal energy coming out from underneath the earth. It just feels like an active volcano everywhere you go. And what Iceland has successfully done is they've been able to use this energy, pump it through these factories all over the countryside, and use it as their source of electricity. So very, very cool that they've been able to do this. 24, the Apollo astronauts trained in Iceland to prepare for the moon landing. In 1965 and 67, NASA sent 2 groups of astronauts to Iceland for geology field training to prepare for the moon landing. Iceland was chosen as it had the most moon-like field areas for the astronauts to prepare themselves. Among the trainees was the first man on the moon himself, Neil Armstrong. You see a picture there on the top center of the first class that went in 1965 of astronauts. And that's actually in Iceland. They were about to prepare for their training. And you see 2 pictures of them in their full gear in Iceland, doing different type of tasks to train for the moon landing and the moonwalks, actually on the moon itself. So very cool that Iceland is so moon-like that they could use it for this purpose. Number 25, Iceland has been the location of important global meetings and competitions. The first one there on the bottom left is the most famous chess match in world history between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky. Famously played their World Chess Championship in Reykjavik, Iceland in 1972. This match, known as the match of the century, was highly anticipated and received widespread media attention due to the intense Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. Ironically, Bobby Fischer won that match, and it was the Russian Boris's first loss in his life. So Bobby Fischer was actually able to beat him in 52 moves. And then on the bottom right there, you see Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, and Mikhail Gorbachev, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. They met in Reykjavik on October 11th and 12th, 1986, in discussions that paved the way for negotiations and treaties between the 2 superpowers that ended the Cold War. So not only did we have a Cold War chess match in 72, but 14 years later, the 2 leaders of these 2 nations came together to end the Cold War and to create peace. All of that happened in Reykjavik, Iceland. Well, hopefully you enjoyed all those incredible facts about Iceland, both in the video and then the 25 interesting facts that I put together in my research. Iceland has a fascinating history. It was the last settled country in Europe, but has since then one of the most robust and interesting histories in Europe. And obviously being the first country that had a functioning democratic legislature, it really makes it an incredible story, especially when it was very violent and usually warlike Vikings that came and settled and created this democracy. Really, really fascinating. And in terms of the actual country itself, the topography, the geothermal energy, the volcanoes, the ice, the fact that the country is always changing, almost every day, the landscape is changing and the people and the government are having to adjust to it and deal with it. And it just makes the country fascinating. I thought last year's visit by myself and my family was going to be a one-time occurrence. And after we left our first trip in Iceland, we actually can't wait to go back. We were able to explore most of southern Iceland. And next time we go back, we want to explore northern Iceland. There's still a lot more to see. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and you want to dig a little bit more into the history of Iceland and learn a little bit more about the country. And hopefully you want to plan your own trip there. I would highly recommend you start putting it together, build yourself a really excellent itinerary to go and to learn about the place and see it for yourself and meet the people and taste the food and really understand their culture. So as I said before, take a look at our other podcast that we did about our trip in October of 2023. I'll post that in the comments down below and you can watch that one as well. And hopefully you love history as much as we do. And we'll see you next time on Traveling Through History. Have a great evening.
Scared